also have the privilege of introducing our 2021 Calvin Schwabe Lectureship speaker. Calvin Schwabe was known as the father of modern epidemiology. Nearly half of his 52-year career was spent at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. As a professor of epidemiology, he made significant contributions to the study of zoonotic diseases, production in food, animal medicine, and public health. This annual lectureship commemorates his pioneering efforts to build and strengthen the UC commitment to One Health by integrating human, animal, and ecosystem protection into our work. So it's my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, someone who has done so much to advance the mission and stature of our world-leading School of Veterinary Medicine. Distinguished Professor in the Department of Pathology, Microbiology, and Immunology, Dr. Michael Lairmore. After 10 years and 2 successful terms as Dean, he stepped down last spring, but he still serves as Distinguished Professor. As Dean, Dr. Lairmore was committed to finding new ways for the faculty, residents, students, and staff of the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine to contribute to the health of animals and people while being good stewards of the environment and the economy of California. His goals included building mission-focused programs to provide outstanding education for society-ready veterinarians and to produce innovative research that addresses important problems ranging from clinical veterinary medicine to public health. Dr. Lairmore earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the University of Missouri at Columbia before working as a dairy and small animal veterinarian. Following private practice, he completed a residency and PhD in experimental pathology at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. He is board certified in veterinary anatomic pathology as well as veterinary virology and immunology. He is a member of numerous prestigious national boards and committees, and he is one of the few veterinarians elected to the National Academy of Medicine. He is also a fellow in the American Academy of Microbiology and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and has received numerous teaching and research awards throughout his career. Dr. Lairmore is a scientist who bridges multiple disciplines to address basic questions related to viral causes of cancer. His research has provided significant breakthroughs in the biology of human retroviruses and the understanding of viral-associated carcinogenesis. He has authored or co-authored 190 scientific publications. As you can see, he is very qualified to speak from a One Health perspective. His lecture today is titled, One Health Approaches to Advance the Health of Animals, People, and the Planet. Please join me in extending a very warm Aggie welcome to Dr. Michael Lairmore.
Good morning. Thank you all very much for this gracious invitation. It's my pleasure to deliver the Calvin Schwabe Lecture to begin the 8th annual UC Davis One Health Symposium. I am honored and very grateful for the students in One Health and the One Health Student Interest Group. As Chancellor May has mentioned, we are uniquely positioned at UC Davis to leverage the expertise of our campus partners and bring multiple disciplines together to solve the problems facing our world through that One Health approach. My lecture today will discuss the impact of Dr. Schwabe, considered the father of modern veterinary epidemiology, my background in One Health, and how it influenced my career, and the innovators in One Health across our campus who are using the One Health approach to advance the health of animals, people, and the environment. I love this quote from Dr. Schwabe. In fact, in virtually all ancient healing traditions, no distinction was made between human and veterinary medicine. And Greek medicine, for example, began to separate into 2 branches only in the 3rd century BC. That fusion as, quote, one medicine also remains true of most traditional medical systems throughout the world. Dr. Schwabe made important scholarly contributions in a broad array of subjects, including epidemiology, diseases of animals transmissible to people, interactions of veterinary and human medicine, and parasitic zoonoses, among other fields. He began his career in the School of Medicine at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1956. A year later, he founded and chaired the Department of Tropical Health in the Schools of Medicine and Public Health at the university, and also the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics and the Department of Public Health in 1962. In 1966, he was recruited here to the school by Dean Bill Pritchard, to the faculty of the School of Veterinary Medicine. He was the first to establish the department here in epidemiology and preventive medicine, the first of its kind of any other veterinary institution. I am deeply honored to deliver a lecture in his name. Like many of our students today, I developed my interest in veterinary medicine at a very early age. Likely as a boy in the fields of Missouri, fascinated by the flora and fauna surrounding me. I began to be curious about the natural world by being immersed in it. As no one in my family had graduated from college, I had to find mentors along the way, from volunteering or later as employment as kennel help. I was a super duper pooper scooper. And I developed an interest later in large animal medicine in my clinical years at the University of Missouri, and went on into a mixed practice with a dairy focus in southeastern Pennsylvania upon graduating. I wanted to be the next James Herriot. After 2 years, I realized other passions, including my interest in diseases and how they express themselves, and pursued this with a residency training in anatomic pathology and infectious disease at Colorado State University in my combined residency and PhD program. While in graduate school, I remember the day my advisor, Dr. James D. Martini, who, by the way, is a UC Davis distinguished alumni, came into a lab meeting with an electron micrograph of a virus particle with typical nucleocapsid shape of lentiviruses, which is a retrovirus well known to veterinary researchers as a cause of chronic diseases of sheep and goats and other animals. He said, no, that's not where the virus particle came from. The virus particle that he showed us came instead from a human patient dying of a new disease that would later be called AIDS. Well, my world changed overnight. I switched my research to study the pathogenesis of these retroviruses. My research focused on how lentivirus-associated disease occurred in young lambs that mimicked what was observed in pediatric AIDS patients. These events shaped my entire career, resulting in my election eventually to the National Academy of Medicine. Well, if you think about it, the original description of lentivirus is a One Health story. In Iceland in the early 1930s, a small number of caracal sheep were imported from Europe to improve Icelandic breeds. Unfortunately, they brought with them a number of important new diseases to that country, including paratuberculosis and an unusually slow-forming progressive disease of the lungs and the brains of these sheep. These diseases were later named Mighty, Icelandic term for dyspnea, and Visna, an Icelandic term for wasting. The diseases were devastating for Icelandic farmers who were geographically isolated. These breeds were highly sensitive to these diseases. Well, a physician named Bjorn Sigurdsson studied these diseases in sheep and introduced us to the concept of slow viral infections, hence the term lente. His work resulted in the first description of lentiviruses, the Visna virus, as I mentioned. And his principles of virus transmission and disease progression would be prophetic as the AIDS crisis unfolded in the early 1980s. From my work on ovine lentiviruses, I was recruited by Dr. Fred Murphy to the Centers for Disease Control. Many of you know Dr. Murphy. Ironically, both of us would find ourselves later as deans of the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, him preceding me by about 2 decades. At CDC, I developed a laboratory to study other retroviruses, including one called human T lymphotropic virus type 1, which was in the blood supply at the time and being unscreened for. HTLV1 was discovered in humans in the late 1970s when it was associated with adult T-cell leukemia lymphoma, a cancer. The virus paralleled bovine leukemia virus, which had been previously known to veterinarians, and classified both of these viruses in the same group, the deltaretroviruses. Concurrently, I became involved in the study of another virus closely related, HTLV2. Both of these viruses infect certain groups at the time, which were IV drug users and other at-risk groups. During this time, but we found through studies, seroepidemiological studies, that there was an elevated seroreactivity in an unexpected population of people, the Guaymi Indians from the Bocas del Toro province of Panama. To identify the cause of that seroreactivity, we used a variety of techniques from the blood of those patients, of those individuals. And we later confirmed that the virus from nucleotide sequencing was a novel form of HTLV2. The demonstration of this infection in this geographically and culturally isolated Central American Indian population without known risk factors of HTLV up to that time suggested that this virus infection actually was endemic in this population. And later, others would show that it was endemic in a number of other indigenous Indian populations. In fact, this was probably with them as they populated the Americas well before the arrival of Europeans. Well, I subsequently was recruited to the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine and the Centers for Retrovirus Research and continued to focus on HTLV1. We knew that HTLV1 infected 5 to 20 million people worldwide, with the highest prevalence in Japan, the Caribbean, Africa, South America, and the Pacific Islands. We also knew that the infection leads to lifelong persistent infection in humans, much like BLV does in cattle. Like all retroviruses, these retroviruses integrate within the genome of their host cell and are expressed when that cell becomes activated. After decades of infection, about 2 to 5% of infected individuals then develop clinical signs such as HTLV1 associated lymphoma. What is unknown, and what was unknown at the time, was how these viruses use their genetic elements to persist and how later they cause these devastating diseases. Well, my training as a veterinarian helped me because we were able to evaluate a number of animal models to ask questions of how HTLV1 replicated, not in cell cultures, but in the animal. I settled on the rabbit model, which was one of the only species that can become persistently infected with molecular clones of HTLV1. And this allowed us to ask questions of specific genetic elements, testing their replication both in cell culture and in the rabbit model. Over a period of years, my lab used a variety of techniques and studied the rabbit model to define the function of so-called accessory genes of this virus. These genes are not needed in cell culture, but control the early stages of infection in vivo. Over time, my laboratory combined efforts with other researchers at Ohio State University and other universities to be funded as a program project grant from the National Cancer Institute. I was later recruited to the OSU Comprehensive Cancer Center as the Associate Director for Basic Sciences and eventually inducted into the National Academy of Medicine. Thus, my One Health journey was being motivated by being asked basic questions as a curious veterinary pathologist. Collectively, our findings indicated immunological control was the key determinant of the virus spread and how these genetic elements determine activation of T cells and shed light on important therapeutic interventions during the infection. Well, that's a career summed up in about 3 slides. But let me say, let's flash forward now to 2011. Upon my recruitment to this school of veterinary medicine, I relied upon my mentors and lessons in One Health to become a leader at this amazing institution. I'd like to now switch and discuss One Health and how it defines our current school mission, emphasizing the innovators working today, as Chancellor May mentioned, that advance the health of animals, people, and the environment that we all must share. In 2011 and early 2012, the faculty and administrative leaders developed the first comprehensive strategic plan for the school. This mission and vision allowed us to refine the direction of the school and define specific goals to accomplish that mission. The plan was revised since 2011, but the mission and the vision remain focused on these health statements to advance the health of animals, people, and the environment. So in fact, the One Health mission became the mission of the entire school. Now, the One Health approach, all of you probably listening understand it, but it really recognizes the growing connection between the health of animals, people, and the environment. It understands that people do not exist in isolation and are part of a larger total ecosystem. You'll hear that throughout the day. The activities and conditions of each member affect others in a variety of levels: economic, culturally, physically, and more. In fact, in 2008, the American Veterinary Medical Association released a report in collaboration with the American Medical Association and recommended that the One Health concept be expanded across both veterinary and human health professions. The concept has continued to gain recognition since, and future practitioners are increasingly expected to be prepared to work with their colleagues across many disciplines to solve these emerging global problems. The original concept has evolved to emphasize also the importance of plants. And this has been incorporated in the current logo of our One Health Institute. One Health approaches are uniquely transdisciplinary by nature to combat problems that have multiple drivers, as shown on this slide, and influences. One can see from this diagram that no one discipline has the knowledge and skills to address this complex problem facing our planet, with a list of problems on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, studies have been performed and examined by, for example, the National Research Council's report that the workforce needs veterinary medicine. And when they examined the needs in veterinary medicine, they identified the value of the One Health approach to address complex global problems, including food security. Viewed also from a different perspective, but from accreditation, the AVMA and AAVMC Council of Education, which accredits veterinary schools and colleges in the United States and internationally. We can see the One Health concept embedded within the curricular standards. These include an emphasis on central biological principles, understanding the natural history of the disease, and principles of the interrelationship of animals and in the environment and their influence on public health. Viewed from a global perspective, we find that the need for One Health approach at the interface of human, livestock, and wildlife health. This intersection often involves increased contact between humans, livestock, and wildlife, as well as a cycle of factors that influence outcomes related to disease transmission and economic pressures and land use. On September 25th, 2015, many countries adopted a set of goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity. These UN goals were specific targets to be achieved over the next 15 years. The United Nations Sustainable Goals include many One Health indicators, such as the ability of food systems to withstand shocks, whether natural or man-made, as part of sustainable global food security, and the need for government policies that preserve the environment, natural resources, and sustainable agro-ecosystems. And you'll hear more about that throughout the day as well. An example of these goals that had clear implications was in sub-Saharan Africa pastoralist, where livestock are very critical for their society and livelihood. A long-term study conducted by Guy Palmer and his colleagues at Washington State University's Global Health Institute demonstrated how these goals highlight the impact of One Health approaches. When vaccinations were introduced of major cattle diseases, and they were accepted by the pastoralists, they saw a significant net income benefit in the reduction of livestock mortality, increased milk production, et cetera. What did they do? These households then directly had increased income from the cattle vaccinations. They invested that in childhood education, and particularly girls' education and food purchases. Both of these outcomes raised the prosperity of the entire community. Now, knowing that we expect our students to be global leaders in veterinary medicine and related fields, we developed, as part of that strategic plan, an Office of Global Programs in 2012. Dr. Patricia Conrad helped found that office and establish its programs, along with Dr. Paulina Crook. The office is led today by Dr. Valtrina Smith and Dr. Crook. This office supports students who work across discipline boundaries, recognizing the interconnectedness of humans, animals, and their environment to solve problems in the community as well as globally through education and service. Another example is our experimental One Health program, is the RX for One Health program that provides a prescription for advanced students and early career professionals to prepare them for immediate engagement in global health careers that will demand effective problem-solving skills and cross-disciplinary engagements and solid foundations in field and laboratory activities. This was developed by Dr. John Mazet and colleagues in the One Health Institute with the support of the Dean's Office. Now at UC Davis, we found that supporting these programs also brings real-world examples of One Health approaches back into the classroom, and it's a compelling way to educate students. These include examples from international projects such as the Health for Animals and Livelihood Improvement, the HALI project, that is a collaborative One Health-based program in Tanzania, and the Global Docs program based in Rwanda. These were developed into a hybrid course supported by my office as well as in collaboration with the Provost Office. And Dr. Valtrina Smith and Dr. Conrad led these efforts to bring that knowledge back into our classrooms here at UC Davis. Well, inspired by these case studies, these were developed further. Our faculty, including Dr. Conrad and Smith, combined efforts in a collaborative effort with other colleagues at the UC Davis College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences and created a new undergraduate major called Global Disease Biology. It is one of the fastest growing majors on campus. It allows students to study disease and its relationship to the health of people, animals, plants, and the environment in a global context. The program uses interdisciplinary approaches to advance the understanding of diseases and social impacts, and the science behind discoveries, causes, evolution, and prevention of disease. Now, we've also supported within the school important extracurricular experiences for our students, including participation in the Veterinary Student Day at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These experiences serve to illustrate potential future careers for our students who want to serve in public health. As I mentioned earlier, the nation has significant needs for veterinary scientists in national research workforce. We've met that challenge by supporting through donor and discretionary funds the Veterinary Scientists Training Program, a combined DVM PhD training program. The mission of the VSTP program is to provide opportunities for veterinary students enrolled in the school to concurrently form their basis of scientific training and enabling them to earn their dual degree. Under the direction of Dr. Shinbin Chen, our program continues to grow and recently received a dedicated NIH VSTP training grant. Dr. Brian Bird is an example of a veterinary scientist trained in our VSTP program. He's a One Health leader that helped lead the CDC Ebola field laboratory in Sierra Leone in 2015. He's now a faculty member at UC Davis, continuing his work in One Health through the One Health Institute. You know, we've also found that the One Health approach excites our students to work also in underserved communities with our colleagues in the School of Medicine. This free One Health clinic offers both people and animals new opportunities in Knights Landing. It's run in parallel with the Human Medical Clinic, which is run by the UC Davis School of Medicine, and these clinics provide much needed services to this underserved community. Joint rounds between our veterinary students and medical students then allow important learning opportunities in One Health to help animals and people in need. Upon arriving at UC Davis in 2011, I also was engaged in conversation with Dr. John Mazet and others about the future of the then Wildlife Health Center. The center was growing and expanding. Dr. Mazet, she had a vision, and it fit very well with our school's strategic plan, and that was to create the One Health Institute at the time. We had the good fortune to have space in Building 3B and allowing us to bring together the various programs of the Wildlife Health Center to form the One Health Institute. The One Health Institute has been integral to global surveillance of zoonotic disease and capacity building through its leadership of PREDICT, a program that aims to find viruses before they spill over into humans. The PREDICT team included the documentation of new species of Ebola virus and a closely related cousin Marburg virus in bats in Sierra Leone. The PREDICT project worked in more than 30 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to enable zoonotic disease detection capabilities in more than 60 laboratories and trained a One Health workforce of thousands of cross-trained professionals. Now, that importance of that One Health research was demonstrated to the world during the COVID pandemic. We know that the agent that causes COVID-19 is SARS-CoV-2. While the exact source of the virus is not known, we know that the work done by experts in the field, including our amazing scientists in the One Health Institute, that the virus likely originated from bats. The virus also is likely circulating and was circulating in people before its emergence out of China. While we know that bats may have been the origin for this pandemic, we also must not forget that their disruption of their natural ecosystem played a major role in evolving the pandemic. In fact, we must not forget that bats play a huge role in biodiversity, controlling insect vectors, and pollinating important food sources. Well, in veterinary medicine, we know the global distribution history of multi-species infections and host jumping of coronaviruses. This family tree shows the distribution of major global animal pathogens of the coronaviruses, ranging from pigs, such as transmissible gastroenteritis, cats with feline infectious peritonitis, to chickens infected with infectious bronchitis virus. We have researchers working on all of these problems. Coronaviruses are one of our most common and impactful foes we face as veterinarians. Well, emerging threats such as COVID epidemic highlighted the importance of needing that well-prepared, technically skilled One Health workforce for disease prevention, detection, and response. As an outgrowth of the PREDICT grant, we were excited that the One Health Institute, led by Dr. Valtrina Smith and colleagues, were awarded the USAID One Health Workforce Next Generation Project, which promotes global health security by empowering One Health University networks in Africa and Southeast Asia to build the human resources and bolster the workforce for more effective disease surveillance and control, using a variety of pre-service and in-service formats. These such as including One Health student clubs like we have here at our school, and experiential learning. They are fostering competencies for the next generation of One Health workers across the world. Well, our faculty also rose to the occasion and are producing evidence-based studies to explain the origin and mitigation measures needed to battle viruses like SARS-CoV-2. For example, the recent study by Dr. Christine Kreuter-Johnson, the newest member among our faculty of the National Academy of Medicine, and we'll celebrate that next month, and colleagues documented zoonotic spillover factors. Well, exploitation of wildlife by humans throughout hunting and trade and habitat degradation and urbanization facilitates the close contact between wildlife and humans, which increases the risk for this spillover. This study provided new evidence for the assessment of spillover risk in human species and highlights how the process to create wildlife population declines also enables the transmission of animal viruses to humans. Well, a major new development supported by the One Health Institute was the EpiCenter for Disease Dynamics, again, led by Dr. Christine Kreuter-Johnson. And this launched into an NIH-funded center, the EpiCenter for Emerging Infectious Disease Intelligence, which is part of a network of 10 centers across the world and now more. And these centers are conducting pathogen host surveillance and studies of pathogen transmission and pathogenesis, as well as immunological responses. Well, disease modeling at the school had been a strong program prior to the PREDICT grant, prior to the EpiCenter. For decades, Dr. Beatriz Martinez-Lopez research approaches provided clear examples of novel methods to understand diseases through what was called the Center for Animal Disease Modeling and Surveillance. CADMS, as it's known as, provides a coordinated and multidisciplinary ongoing research effort to develop models and modeling systems. The integrated of complex data sets and global spread of animal diseases, including the risk of disease entering the US, needed prediction of how these might be mitigated. The insights now are incorporated into multiple data sets to find new findings to provide new insights in that One Health approach. Here's an example of how that portal works. It was incorporated in surveillance systems and models to detect the presence of selected animal diseases throughout the world and detect the global spread of those, and looking at risk factors that may enter and cause those to spill over into the United States. This information is then provided to federal and state agencies, commodity groups, and industrial stakeholders to provide potential mitigation of the potential spread of these diseases, and also to inform policy and strategic discussions of preventive controls. An example of that work that Dr. Patrice Lopez and her colleagues have performed, including deciding how classical swine fever was affecting other countries. These results guide the prioritization of vaccine strategies, as well as help design other interventional strategies, such as targeted education or movement restriction for high-risk areas to more rapidly advance the eradication of swine fever in Peru. While expanding the look at One Health innovations beyond COVID, I'd like to demonstrate the vast spectrum of One Health programs and projects across our campus. Directed by Dr. Michael Siccardi, the One Health Institute, as mentioned, continues to support multiple programs across the spectrum of animal, human, and environmental health. To illustrate some of their innovations, I'd like to highlight some of their recent projects. As mentioned, the Oil Wildlife Care Network is a statewide collective of trained wildlife care providers, regulatory agencies, academic institutions, and wildlife organizations working to rescue and rehabilitate oil wildlife in California. It is recognized as a world leader in this model of oil spill responses, rescue, rehabilitation, and research, and is an outstanding example of what can be accomplished when multiple institutions and organizations work collectively together. They respond to them. They also, as Chancellor May mentioned, responded to the recent oil spill in the Huntington Beach area and brought worldwide attention to those devastations of those spills. In 2009, the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Team teamed up with the Karen C. Dreyer Wildlife Health Center at UC Davis to form Gorilla Docs. Dr. Kirsten Gilardi leads the Wildlife Health Center and helps direct the Gorilla Docs program for UC Davis. The program, using this One Health approach, supports veterinarians and their staff to ensure the long-term health and survival of mountain gorillas and the human-animal communities that share their habitat. They're one of the only population in nature that has actually increased in size of that population because of that intervention. The mission of the SeaDoc Society is to ensure the health of marine wildlife and ecosystems in the Salish Sea area of our country with innovative research and scientific exploration, and also novel educational programs. Founded in the year 2000, the SeaDoc Society, led by Dr. Joe Gatos and his team, conducts and sponsors innovative scientific research in the inland waterways of the Pacific Northwest. This is a rich and vibrant ecosystem to more than 30 species of mammals, over 170 species of birds, 250 species of fish, and more than 3,000 species of invertebrates, highlighting the importance of their work. Let me give you an example of other types of research from the One Health Institute. Research conducted by One Health investigators provided novel insights for our increasing connected world. Dr. Tracy Goldstein and her colleagues from the One Health Institute have linked the decline of Arctic sea ice to the emergence of deadly viruses that could threaten marine mammals in the North Pacific. A 15-year study published in the journal Scientific Report highlights how radically reshaping historic sea ice may have opened up pathways for the contact between Arctic and subarctic species that was previously impossible. Well, innovations in One Health approaches are being not restricted to the One Health Institute in our school and are working throughout our school. For example, Dr. Chris Barker and Dr. Lark Coffey and colleagues have formed a CDC Center of Excellence that involves multiple universities and agency partners. The Pacific Southwest Regional Center for Excellence in Vector-Borne Diseases includes universities, government agencies, and non-government agency groups. And they approach surveillance, vector control, genetics, epidemiological tools to prevent the spread of vector-borne diseases, and also help train public health professionals. Emerging infectious disease present also opportunities for our investigators who use non-human primate models. We're very fortunate to have the California National Primate Research Center here on campus. In collaboration, this team of scientists, when the Zika virus devastated the world and emerged in South America, quickly came and organized to understand and study the pathogenesis of this new virus infection. And they demonstrated that the infection of infant rhesus monkeys produced similar brain lesions as those seen in human newborns with congenital Zika virus syndrome. But they also went on to demonstrate miscarriages in stillborns which was not known at the time or not observed as in humans, but highlighted the importance of Zika virus in that devastation as well, which paralleled the human infection. Another example, Sarah Thomasy. Dr. Sarah Thomasy leads a team of researchers and provided examples of innovative non-human primate models for inherited retinal diseases and provided therapeutic testing opportunities toward gene replacement and editing for retinal diseases in humans. Now, led by Dr. Pam Line in our Department of Molecular Biosciences and her colleagues, the UC Davis CounterAct Center for Excellence is dedicated to using One Health approaches to identify and improve counter measures against chemical threats that may involve in producing seizures in humans, but also in animals. I'm going to show you a short video to illustrate that innovative approach and their teamwork and provide medical approaches for stopping seizures.
The type of research that we do here is incredibly multidisciplinary.
In a single table, in a single meeting, you have chemists and neurologists and toxicologists and engineers all tackling the same problem.
We've gotten into some really interesting scientific problems that are really complicated problems that our society is dealing with. And so trying to understand what are the factors that increase risk for these neurologic disorders is a really important aspect of research. And I feel like with the team that I've been able to assemble here at UC Davis, that we're actually generating some really important insights that will make life better for people in the future as we move forward.
That's a clear example of how that teamwork approach involves multiple disciplines using a One Health approach in that particular problem. Well, researchers have contributed to a variety of also in the field-based studies to protect the environment of threatened species that we cherish. For example, Dr. Karen Shapiro and colleagues are studying Lake Tahoe to test microplastics sinking to the bottom of the lake and staying also near the surface. Their goal is to ultimately eliminate microplastics from the sand and the water. Other examples include our research teams that have identified heart disease as a killer threat for southern sea otters feasting on domoic acid in their food web. One Health researchers have also used pathology reports of more than 50 killer whales stranded over nearly a decade in Northeast Pacific and Hawaii to show that orcas face a variety of mortal threats, many of those stemming from interference from humans. The patterns of emergence of wildlife cancer has also offered interesting and novel insights to potentially unique non-age-related mechanisms of carcinogenesis or cancer across species. Dr. Patty Pasavento demonstrated that her curiosity, which is infectious, to the study of natural diseases, and many of you may have seen her Oscar Scham lecture in which she explained her research, led to multiple novel discoveries of naturally occurring viral infections in wildlife, many with surprising associations with disease and cancer. This was reviewed in Nature Reviews in 2018. Well, unfortunately, each wildlife season we learn more and more and develop new and innovative partnerships with private groups and state agencies. Through a new collaborative, as mentioned by Chancellor May, the One Health Institute and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have seen the formation of the Wildlife Disaster Network. This effort complements our ongoing efforts to address the needs of our community, region, and stakeholders during the wildfire season. We're also excited to see the launch of the California Veterinary Emergency Team, which is a new program launched in 2021, supported by funds from the California State Legislature. This CVET program will support and train a network of government agencies, individuals, and organizations to aid in domestic animals and livestock during natural disasters throughout the state. Well, we translate some of those discoveries as well. We translate it from clinical cases into innovative discoveries. Our clinical scientists, such as Dr. Josh Stern, who leads our veterinary medical teaching hospital, and colleagues, have effectively used their caseloads to address important questions relevant to animals and people who recover from natural disasters, such as our California wildfires. They found that cats who suffer burns and smoke inhalation in the recent California wildfires also had a higher incidence of heart problems. And in cat study, they had moderate to severe burns. The incidence of cardiac changes was higher, but paralleled human reports in cancer. So they truly are a canary in the coal mine. Well, across the country, linked to our national animal health laboratory systems are laboratories that utilize One Health approaches to protect the health of our nation's food supply. I am pleased to see the appointment of Dr. Ashley Hill, one of our epidemiologists who excels using innovative techniques to provide new insights in animal diseases and protecting our food supply. Here she's pictured with Dr. Alex Ardanz, who helped create the current series of CADMS laboratories throughout the state of California, making it a model for the nation. For One Health mission is well illustrated with innovations from a team of investigators from our FDA Western Center for Excellence over the past 12 years, with additional partners like the CDFA, the California Department of Public Health, the USDA, et cetera. They have worked to protect the public from foodborne illnesses, such as illnesses that may be caused from vegetable growers that they must identify and manage across multiple environmental sources of contamination, such as the intrusion of wild animals. And these are to ensure the public health concerns remain minimal and do not disrupt our food supply. Dr. Rob Atwell leads our cooperative extension program. They use One Health approaches to identify solutions to complex challenges in agriculture, from food safety and disease surveillance to biotechnology and animal welfare. Because of the size and type of agriculture in California, novel approaches that seek transdisciplinary approaches to solve problems are required. This knowledge is then transmitted to farmers through our cooperative extension faculty and county advisors throughout the state. A good example of our cooperative extension faculty, Dr. Emmanuel Okello's research, is focused on antimicrobial research and stewardship. Now, antimicrobial resistance is a major threat to the health of the world's populations and our future economies of many countries. Dr. Okello's research is focused on promoting antimicrobial stewardship in the livestock industry, and his goal is to develop guidelines and best management practices that reduce antimicrobial resistance while maintaining the health and welfare of herds and flocks. Our faculty at UC Davis have also teamed up with other colleagues at UC Davis, such as the El Nino Bee Laboratory. Shown here is Dr. Jonathan Deere of our UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. Along with colleagues, they've joined with Oregon State University's Honeybee Laboratory to create new courses designed to educate veterinarians in treating diseases of honeybees through an award from the U.S. Specialty Crop Multi-State Program. Led by former Dean Benny Osborne, field-based examples are utilized also to create new safety educational materials for stakeholders, as well as government agencies such as the Food and Drug Administration. These programs have assisted in the implementation of the Food Modernization Act in context to our large food producing systems. This agriculture-based One Health course support the goals of homeland security, national preparedness systems, and are tailored for people in rural regions of the United States. We also must not forget that the One Health educational approaches are equally critical for small-scale farming and the emerging trends in urban agriculture. These markets have been recognized by the USDA, which is funding One Health approaches to determine disease risks, educational needs for stakeholders involved. Dr. Aldo Perez research is focused on this, on quantitative methods to identify strategies that improve animal health and control infectious diseases in livestock on small-scale farms. Now, the parallels in naturally occurring diseases between humans and animals also provides multiple examples of how One Health approaches are being applied at the interface of animal and human health. Dr. Amir Cole and colleagues summarized the many parallels in animal and human diseases in this review in Science Translational Medicine. I love the cover, shows two dogs leading the effort of a human across this bridge. Our faculty involved in translational medicine have formed with other veterinary schools also a clinical and translational science One Health Alliance. More than 15 colleges have teamed up in this effort called COHA, and each is partnered with medical schools in their vicinity or colleges with a common mission to advance the understanding of diseases shared by both animals and people. We have that, a good example of that is here on campus, led by Dr. Michael Kent and Shenbin Chen and colleagues. UC Davis has received the first NCI grant in the country to fund a comparative oncology training program launched in August of 2020. The training program supports interdisciplinary institutions and focuses on the research career opportunities for pre- and postdoctoral scientists in the study of comparative oncology. It's the first of its kind federal grant with more than $2 million being awarded to UC Davis to train the next generation of oncology researchers. A recent discovery also in comparative genetics across dog breeds is shown they're responsible of chondrodystrophy from Dr. Banish. Danica has led the way with a number of studies to look at, for example, genes that may cause dwarfism and problems in our breed, such as the dachshund, but also found that they were involved in dwarfism in humans. Pint, as shown here, will be featured next week, by the way, at the UC Davis football game, for those of you that are going, and to honor his efforts at retrieving Ts in addition to contributing to genetic research. Now, these genes are expressed in both genetic and epigenetic environmental influences, and I look forward to continuing to see that One Health approach in genetics at the genomic level to show new discoveries for both animals and people. Another clear example of translational medicine is demonstrated by Dr. Niels Peterson and colleagues who have researched novel treatments against deadly coronaviruses in cats. As I mentioned, infectious peritonitis is one of those coronaviruses that cause chronic infections of cats that resemble and serve as a natural model for people of a coronavirus infection. These types of treatments that they've been working on parallel and inform drugs like remdesivir, which is now in the front line serving as therapies for human patients suffering from SARS-CoV-2 in this epidemic. Well, I'm going to end my lecture with a few questions for all of you to ponder throughout the day. And that is, how do we use the context of One Health to solve current threats? Threats, for example, to using ruminants as reliable food sources and feeding the world are also coupled with concerns about environmental impacts from large-scale livestock sectors. We know that ruminants can take non-edible plant material and convert it to meat, milk, bone, and hides for human use, a very important source of animal source proteins throughout the world. But many in our society, especially in developing economies, point out the negative effects of livestock ownership that may worsen human health and nutritional status, such as livestock being kept with potential for disease transmission between livestock and people, but also concerns about the enormous quantity and the conductivity of animal waste and their associated enteric zoonosis to nearby critical water sources. So one of the things our scientists are actively pursuing is answers to these questions of concern, but that's a question that all of us should be concerned about. What about aquaculture and ocean-based food, which is predicted to play an increasing role in feeding the world going forward? Our teams provide science-based support in the California aquaculture interests, including aquaculture producers, state and federal agencies. Our primary efforts are here in California, but you can understand how this extends throughout the world and how important aquaculture may be in the future. So how will this field grow in response to the existing need and future needs of the world? What about the next pandemic? When and what will be our next pandemic? We know, for example, that avian influenza spreads from Asia to Europe and the US every year through the Pacific or through the wild bird flyways. Molecular epidemiological studies show that the H5N8 strain that hit North America and caused devastation in our poultry population was also found in Southeast Asia and Europe. Over 45 million poultry were depopulated in the US from that outbreak. So what will our public health lessons teach us? And it was we learn not only from COVID, but also these other future pandemics And how could they be applied to future outbreaks? I'm sure these are the type of questions that will be discussed throughout the panel sessions throughout the day. In summary, while I've focused on One Health approaches in this lecture, I want to recognize that there have been another concept champion, planetary health. And knowing that human health and civilization depend on flourishing natural systems and wise stewardship. This movement recognizes the environmental threats to clear and potent dangers that require urgent and transformational actions to protect the present and future generation. They propose involving governments to aid in the integration of social, economic, and environmental policies, and the creation and synthesis and application of this interdisciplinary knowledge. Now, this may include a redefinition of prosperity to focus on the enhancement of the quality of life and delivery of improved health for all, together with respect and integrity for natural systems. As we learned this past week through the UN Climate Conference, COP26, these problems facing our planet require urgent, collaborative action to make a difference, and not more blah, blah, blah. By whatever term we want to call it, these approaches must continue to work across disciplines to make our world a safer and healthier place to live. To honor the legacy of Dr. Calvin Schwabe, we must do this. We have no choice. It is our collective future. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and to listening throughout the day for the rest of the highlights from this important symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lairmore. Thank you for being here and your wonderful presentation. At this time, for the audience, we would like to open the floor up to audience questions. So please direct your questions to the Zoom Q&A. And Dr. Lairmore, our first question is, how do we create an environment, whether in schools or otherwise, to encourage innovation and out-of-the-box thinking? And what are maybe some specific resources that can facilitate that?
I think you brought up an important point in asking the question, which was schools. And I think educating the next generation is really critical. I pointed out one large grant, the One Health Workforce Next Generation Grant, as an example, led by Dr. Smith. And it's wonderful to see that kind of global effort in multiple countries. But if looking at it also, we see examples of One Health approaches, the appreciation for these approaches going down to the grade school level. I have grandkids. I want them to understand this for the future of their future. And I love to see the efforts made by people like Dr. Debbie Thompson, who has One Health lessons that are being translated so that they can be incorporated within the elementary schools as well. So I really think it covers a spectrum from the very young to those in my generation that maybe need to be re-educated as well. So I think there is a whole array of things we can do.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lairmore, and thank you again for your presentation. Another question we have is, what do you find can be some barriers to innovation, and how can we address them in education and outside of education?
Thank you, Madison. That's a great question. Of course, as a dean, I was always interested in how could we fund programs? How could we look at ways in which we can develop these programs? Because, without really the resources, it really doesn't happen. So one of the things I think we take an all hands on deck approach, obviously, in a school like ours, and that is partnerships. And that partnership can take the form of foundations. It can take the form of state governments. It can take the form of federal governments. I think things like the infrastructure bill that we see that was passed last night is a good example. There may be within that infrastructure ways to bolster the infrastructure for even One Health approaches. So we are working, for example, I think veterinarians through the associations like the AVMA and the AVMC to lobby federal government and state government sources. A good example of that was the CVET program. We knew the need for 10 years, and we tried many times. Finally, we had a state senator, Senator Glazier, who took up the challenge and produced a bill that led to new resources to battle wildfires from that One Health approach, and CVET will be part of that outcome. So resources, partnerships, and really those are the barriers sometimes that limit us. And again, going back to the first question, education. Thanks, Madison.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is, what do we know about processes like design thinking, and why might those skills not always be taught as core skills to our students?
Yeah, design thinking, you know, when you say the word design thinking, I think of my son, Jared, who is actually an architect in New York, and he thinks about designs as well. But, you know, when I think about that, covers a variety of topics. We learned through COVID, for example, building designs are critical, and really thinking about how do we work together? What will be the future workforce, and how will we work together? What will be the infrastructure and the design of even buildings with better ventilation, for example? So that's one form of design. Another form of design is how they approach problems. That sort of flow chart of how you think about it. You know, veterinarians and physicians in public health think about many factors when they look at a problem. So that RX for One Health course, for example, is really to put those professionals together and think about how do we design a solution to a problem? And very often it involves information gathering. What do we really know about the problem? What are the epidemiological factors of this issue? And then focusing on the design of specific solutions. It may not be the solution that we came in with to start with, but that design thinking of looking at all of the factors first is really a definition of that One Health approach to design the solution.
Thank you. Another question that we got from the chat was how UC Davis collaborates with policymakers on One Health topics.
That's a great question too. And again, that's really critical because, you know, we see examples of that both from the research. So one would be, you know, making sure our research data is translated. One of the critical issues in the future will be science communications. How do we communicate that not only to the public to better educate and inform the public, but to policymakers? A good example of, again, going back to our One Health Institute, where they understood how do we save an endangered species like condors, where they found even a small amount of lead in the environment can kill those animals, those endangered, really charismatic symbols of our nature and our environment. And it eventually resulted in a lead ban for lead shot in hunters. And so that's one example, but taking that information, presenting it, being a source of information. UC Davis is a great source. We're often called to testify at the state and national levels. A good example, Mike Ziccardi, the whole One Health, the Oil Wildlife Care Network was formed from a need and then fulfilling that need, and then constant education to the policymakers to produce a tax on the petroleum industry to tie that to how they clean up the environment. So yes, a critical question, a constant job, and we are fortunate to have really good government office here, Dr. Brandon Mento and Adrian Lopez at the federal and state level that help us produce programs like the CVET program. That was from translating the need to the state legislature to get that program. So great question. Thank you, Madison.
Thank you for that. Another question we had in the chat was, how can we incorporate One welfare more in the One Health approach and emphasize welfare more?
That's a great question, because animal welfare, we have some founding members in animal welfare. It's an AVMA discipline. We have a lot of people interested in that. And when we think about that, that involves a unique role for veterinarians, of course, because we think about animal welfare just as part of our training. So in conducting that, for example, when we're informing how do we produce the next livestock center, you know, we took information from Temple Grandin to how do we design better chutes and facilities and fencing that take into animal welfare. Also, again, to be advocates of animal welfare in the environment that we will all work in the global environment. So understanding that the stress of animals results in animals that don't feed as well, may not weight gain if you're a food producer. The program that we have here within the state the beef quality assurance programs has really taught ranchers to be sensitive to animal welfare in producing our food supply. But it also involves all the way down to the level of wildlife, the wildlife welfare. And how do we understand if we disrupt their ecosystems, the stress on those, and we could lose endangered species because of that. And that's a real critical message because it not only protects them and biodiversity, but may protect us. Because if we disrupt the ecosystem, we've seen the devastating outcome through this COVID pandemic. And so their welfare is tied to our welfare. And I think that's a really important message. So thank you for that question, Anna.
Thank you again. Another question we got from Jane Sykes, which I believe is also a very important question. She mentioned that she had attended a lecture on innovation in global animal health, and it was delivered to engineering and business students. However, only a few people knew of One Health or had ever heard of it. So how do we disseminate the importance of the One Health approach to more people outside of the medical and veterinary field?
Well, thank you for that question from Dr. Sykes. And Dr. Sykes, of course, is an innovator. So it's appropriate that she would ask that question. And she is really helping us direct innovation with partners such as the Graduate School of Management. And so absolutely, I think one of the things we need to do, and again, as One Health practitioners, is understand that the message isn't just for us in our closed communities, but it's to be spread. I mentioned earlier education. That's one way to do it, so the next generation understands that. But also understand that that term, One Health, may not be recognized by somebody in engineering. But when we talk about the problem, when we talk about using their skills, and we talk about solutions for that, they get it. So when we're talking to engineers, for example, they love to come over and work here at the School of Veterinary Medicine because they get to see the problem from multiple factors. Well, they're really helping us as partners in One Health, but we need to continue to strive to take those messages out there. So it's great to see that Dr. Sykes and others are going to engineers, going to other disciplines and talking about this approach because it's absolutely critical because we need them. We need them. We don't, veterinarians don't have the skill set to solve ventilation problems in a building. Some of you may, but not me. And so I think that's a critical factor. Take the message out, but also talk about the problem and the solutions in context. Don't get hung up on the term, just do the work. Dr. Jana Mazet loves the conversation around the term One Health. And I've heard her quoted as saying, we don't argue about the term, we just do it. It's like the Nike approach.
Thank you for that. We have just a couple more questions. So another one from the chat. The One Health concept is obviously on a global scale. And they're wondering if I think you touched on a lot of kind of global programs during your presentation, but is there any interest or initiative to work with UN agencies to use the One Health concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the UN sustainable goals, and when we approach groups like FOA and FAO and the UN, and we engage in those, I think we need to engage as veterinarians, meaning leaders within the associations. I was very fortunate to be able to attend a meeting of OIE in Paris. There was over 160 institutions at meeting, and you can see the problems that they're focused on at a global or international level require that cooperation. Our role is to really understand that we can help in that, so becoming involved. And so that's one of the reasons why it's really critical for us to understand what their goals, what are they thinking? If it's the UN sustainable goals, we need to identify in those goals how the One Health approach is being approached through our practice. And I mentioned that study from Washington State is a good example of that, where we can tie what they did in Africa to 3 or 4 of those UN sustainable goals. And continuing to do that will help drive that message at a world level. We must continue that. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much, Dr. Lairmore, for that wonderful presentation and for sharing such important examples of One Health collaborations with us today. Also, just a quick message from all the vet students. We all sincerely appreciate everything you have done for us students as Dean, and we thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to serve, and I wish you all the best. And also all the best to the new leadership, Dr. Mark Stetter. He is a fantastic new dean. I'm sure that he'll continue on with this One Health message and continue to lead the school to new and even greater accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you so much.